Welcome to the 4Q podcast. My name is Sheena Shui. I'm a therapist who specializes in anxiety, burnout, and relationship issues, and truthfully, all the underlying stuff that brings that forward. I'm also a business coach. So in this podcast, we talk all things life, business, love, relationships, and everything in between. So let's get into today's episode. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode of the 4Q podcast. If you've been following me for a while, you will notice that I am leaning more into myself and my personality in this space. It has been bred out of me as a therapist, as a clinician, that I'm not meant to show up as myself. I am of service to others. I am a public servant. I am a servant to the community. But since I have been doing more coaching rather than therapy, when I've been leaning into more a directive role, it's time for me to show up with more authenticity and more of me, more direction. And so with that, I want to talk about topics that I want to talk about. It can be very easy. And again, for those of you who get business coaching from me, there is this idea that we're just meant to talk always about things that relate to our offer or our services. But sometimes if we've got a platform like this, we just need to be able to talk about what we want to talk about or what we find interesting. And so sometimes I want to be able to talk to you guys about things that I think are worth discussing in our community, because at the end of the day, I'm creating a community and a movement that I want you to be part of, that questions the status quo, that questions everything you've been conditioned to believe. Because every time I personally have worked on my conditioning and let go of another layer that came from my parents or my school or religion or the society I grew up in or the medical system or even my own training, my psychology degree, my social work masters, my counseling masters, the neuroscience I studied. Sometimes we need to question things a little bit, and it's worth just diving into topics that are up for discussion. So with that long ass intro, what I'm getting at is we're going to discuss 3 topics that I think are really worth discussing, which are 1, the school system. The second is neurodivergence or ADHD, autism, even things like anxiety or sensory stuff. We're going to discuss that. And third is the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistic Manual that we use for diagnosing disorders. We're going to talk about that. So first controversy or conspiracy we're going to talk about is the school system. The reason I labeled this episode Controversies and Conspiracies is that when we talk about something and people don't believe it yet, or it's so far out of their realm of what they can conceive, they call it a conspiracy. And that tends to invalidate the idea or pull away from the idea or make it sound like we're wearing tin hats if you talk about this topic. And so I'm going to call it a controversy as well, because often what happens is when we discover something that has evidence and to be true, that's when we backpedal on if it's a conspiracy and it actually turns into a controversy. So with that being said, with these 3 points, I just want to make it clear I'm neither here nor there on each of them. I just want to bring you the evidence of what people are talking about and what people are discussing online, and you can do your own research and make up your own mind. But I think it's important to bring up these topics so we can discuss them. So that being said, with the first one, the school system, there's been a lot of talk online about how the school system is rearing kids to be employees and to conform without question, rather than being thinkers and entrepreneurs and passionate. And that's leading a lot of what we call the unschooling movement. And there's other reasons as well. But I don't know if you've heard of unschooling, but if you haven't, and again, I'm not all over it, so apologies if you're an unschooler and I get this wrong. But yeah, there is a lot of ideas that we're being conditioned to believe certain things for the benefit of certain industries, certain ways of doing society. Because if you look back in history, it was the Rockefeller family who started a lot of the educational system and the way that we do things nowadays. And they're business owners. And they had motivations as to why they wanted certain things taught in school and in the way that they are. Because a question that I've often had is, why in the world are we making children under 8 years old who have boundless energy, if you're a parent, even under 10, why are we making them sit at a desk and try to learn things when we actually find that the best learning, all the research shows this, that the best learning actually comes from kids learning in groups together. So giving them a task and them figuring it out together. So how do we figure out what floats and what sinks? Let's build boats, let's make them, let's race them, let's test them carrying stuff, rather than just learning about what floats and what doesn't from a book, for example, or watching the teacher do an experiment, rather than all of us trying it out for ourselves and using not just our visual learning, but the kinesthetic learning and the active learning and all of that. And even more evidence is shown that a lot of the time, quote unquote, the naughty kids or the bad kids or the troublemakers in school, so often kids who would normally be diagnosed with ADHD and autism and they get overwhelmed, when they are put in a natural environment, particularly ADHD kids, particularly ADHD boys as well, is they become leaders. So when you take the kids out of a sit-down classroom and into a natural environment where they're just playing and they're creating and they have a task at hand, those kids excel because they're taking in so much and thinking about so much that they can bring a lot of incredible ideas together that neurotypical kids normally wouldn't. So there is this kind of discussion around, and that's why they make such great entrepreneurs, which I'll get to, but there is this kind of discussion around, if we know this about kids, that they thrive in natural environments, that they thrive in the first few years, if you let them pursue what they're naturally passionate about, they're not behind. So there's other countries who let them do this and then do more of the sit down, rote kind of learning in a classroom later. And if anything, they're ahead in terms of the level of mathematics they understand, science, English, all of the things that we deem to make somebody intelligent, right? But that's the other thing as well, is that we understand that when we were hunter-gatherers, there were levels, there were different things we needed people to be intelligent in. So if everyone had the one kind of intelligence, say physical intelligence, we wouldn't have the mathematics and science that we need. We need a blend of people to make society work. And yet often our schooling system says if you don't learn and work in a certain way, it's not good enough. In psychological studies, I remember this was a while ago now, so I'm so embarrassed to say that it's almost 20 years ago. In my psychology degree, they were talking about the fact that we know that back at my school, OP, so they've changed that to ATARs now, but the scales for you to get into university, things like that, NAPLAN, all of those sort of testing don't actually correlate with how intelligent a child is across different areas. So we know that the testing doesn't work, all of that. So I guess this comes back to the conspiracy or the controversy around what is the point of the schooling system? Because I certainly feel as though I didn't think for myself or do my own research or figure out how to put different concepts together until I was at least in university, because I had really great, amazing university lecturers who were like, question the status quo, figure this out on your own, find patterns. And that being said, not all of them were like that. Some of them were like, there is only one answer to this and you've got to figure it out. Because again, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I certainly know that in school, I had many of these experiences where in maths, I got the answer, but I did my working out in a different way. Or I wasn't able to show my working out. And we all know that you had to write everything down to get the marks. Or if you didn't do it the right way, this is you'd get marked down. Why is that? If you're getting the same result, right? If someone bakes a cake but they don't follow the recipe, is it not a cake still? They've just figured out their own unique way of making it. But we get marked down for that. And so again, when it comes to this controversy or conspiracy around, is the school system training us to just be followers, employees, good people who follow the system because then we won't question the status quo. Then these big companies can exploit us because we just go, you pay me, I'm good. I don't question things, it's inefficient, whatever, you keep me blocked. It's just an interesting conversation to have. And I'd love to know your thoughts. If you're listening to this, reach out to me on Instagram. That's my main hangout, or feel free to email me or wherever you want to find me after this, because I think it's just a really interesting conversation that we need to talk more of. And it's interesting, the stuff coming out on social media of people's theories and all of that. So that's the first controversy and conspiracy we're going to talk about. The second one is neurodivergence, and is it actually a problem? Now, the three topics we're going to talk today, they actually all overlap a lot, but the neurodivergence, what we're talking about here is things like diagnosis like ADHD, autism, even things like oppositional defiance disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder. But most of the time we're talking about ADHD and ASD. So we're talking about people who their brains, quote unquote, work differently than normal. There is some challenge in the social media world at the moment around, is it actually an issue? Because what people are talking about, again, if we look at hunter-gatherers, is that people with ADHD take action much faster in natural environments. And so we needed those people to be the ones to go after the tiger, to act fast, to do without thinking sometimes, because that would have helped us survive, or that would have made progress quicker than other people. As well as the fact that a lot of people with ADHD and autism can link a lot of random concepts together that someone who doesn't relate to these disorders wouldn't necessarily put together. So you'll find a lot of people with ADHD and autism, they'll link something in biology to something in physics to something in anthropology, to something in music, to something in art. Like, they can link the dots that other people can't see. And again, people with autism are extremely good at noticing patterns, which is why a lot of people can go undiagnosed, because they pick up the patterns in human behavior, they pick up the patterns in socializing, and they just mimic those patterns rather than it coming sort of from a natural state or a different way. And so there's this argument that all of them would have served a purpose in hunter-gatherer times. You know, we needed the people to spot the patterns, who can see things, all of that, who act fast, all of that. And we probably needed people who were organized, because generally people who don't relate to those disorders are more organized, can think a little bit more clearly, or can actually sort of take a step back for a moment sometimes, you know. So what the controversy is that, are these disorders only considered disorders because it doesn't fit in with the world built by neurotypical people? So again, if you have 3 different types of animals with different skill sets, but if this is a bad analogy, but it's the one that my brain thinks of. But let's say you build a world for dogs, but it's built around German Shepherds, their build, their height, all of that. Then if you've got a dog that's a Labrador, you know, Labradors love water and they thrive in water. But if you build a dog, you know, palace that's only made for German Shepherds, it might not have the water that the Labradors thrive in. Or, excuse me, if you have like a Jack Russell, for example, and they're great at hunting vermin and small things and that kind of thing, but you don't build that into that world, the Labrador and the Jack Russell aren't going to thrive as much. And in fact, they might even get in the way of the way that the German Shepherd works, because the world has been built around them. The playground has been built around them. And what a lot of people are saying is that we've built a world built around neurotypical people because they tend to be more organized and have built this world. They tend to be more in power. And so it's interesting to think of it like that. It's an interesting point that's out there on social media to think about that, because I guess another point that people are saying is that a lot of people who are neurodivergent, ADHD, autism, question the system. They question the status quo. If we can see something can be done more efficiently, it absolutely irks us as to why it is not done more efficiently. And so we're constantly questioning people. We're constantly trying to push things. And if you're trying to control the masses or control an organization or things like that, that's a real pain in your side. So what would be good is to label that as bad, to label that as not normal, and to medicate that. Or to continue to put it down rather than build it in a way that can thrive, which is why we often talk about how can we build our workplaces to actually get the most out of an ADHD or an autistic brain, because they work different. But if you tap into the special skills that they have, it thrives. So it's letting go of the conditioning of we have to work a 9 to 5, we have to be in the office. I know personally, I work best when I can jump over here and jump over there and go for a walk in the middle of the day and then do this and then, you know, come back to it later. A 9 to 5 is not great for me. Which again is why a lot of people with ADHD end up as entrepreneurs, and that's a whole thing. But I guess that's the second thing we're talking about, is the controversy and conspiracy of, is neurodivergence only labeled as bad or disordered because it doesn't fit in with neurotypical people or controlling the masses? Love to know your thoughts on that one too. Final one, which very much overlaps with the other two as well, is the controversy around the DSM. If you're not familiar with the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that, as therapists, psychologists, counselors, social workers, psychiatrists, we use that in mental health to categorize mental health issues. So it's if you've got these traits for this amount of time and this kind of pathology, you meet the criteria for, these diagnoses. Now, there was a research paper that came out and where it came out in 2019, where it says a new study concluded that psychiatric diagnoses are scientifically worthless as tools to identify discrete mental health disorders, even labeling it as scientifically meaningless psychiatric diagnosis. And basically what they found was that I'll read you what it says right here. So there is a huge overlap in symptoms between diagnosis. So for example, eating less or eating more, sleeping less or sleeping more, certain interpersonal issues, that kind of thing. That is in so many disorders. Like, I cannot tell you how many have that. The other thing that this paper mentions is almost all diagnosis marks the role of trauma in an adverse events. So if you're not familiar with adverse childhood events, there was a massive study that found that if you experience trauma in your childhood, you have much higher rates of mental health, physical health, all sorts of issues because of your adrenaline system, cortisol in the body, stress chemicals. It has an effect on your brain, your development, how you interpret the world, all those sorts of things. And so what this paper is really highlighting is that a lot more could be explained through the trauma and attachment lens. And this one is actually that I agree with, because when you work with me, I'm not labeling you. I look at you through the world of the window of tolerance and your personality type, your trauma and stressor personality type, because so much could be explained through that lens that works better for me. Because anxiety, ADHD sit on the same side of the window of tolerance. It's a hyper state. Hypo states are things like depression, burnout, all of that. And things like bipolar explain how you go from hyper aroused to hyper, and so on. And, even things like schizophrenia, in other cultures that aren't Western, they look at it as someone who's stuck in the in-between, between the spiritual world and the physical world. They don't see it as a bad thing. They actually see them as people of interpreters of the world between, and are treated as such. They are treated with respect and kindness, because the history of mental health and even addictions is that we put people away and we don't talk about it. They're shunned from society. Even when I used to do research papers on this, is that even the hospitals now, the mental health and drug and alcohol building isn't in the hospital. It's actually a separate building out of the hospital because I used to work in it. It's just tradition. We don't like to look at that. But again, what we know is from alcohol and drug issues, it's all trauma. So it really hurts me when I hear people calling people addicts and treating them like they're nothing, when all we know is that these people have trauma and they're treating it with drugs and alcohol, whereas other people treat it with the busyness of work, like socially acceptable addictions, OCD and cleaning the house and all of that. That's socially acceptable to manage your trauma that way. Legal drugs as well, or prescription medications. For some reason, you're okay to take that. But when you do something to numb the pain, it's seen as not okay. So just a very interesting talk, because if that is true about the DSM, again, it leads into, well, what's the purpose of it? What benefit is somebody getting from labeling people with these labels? Does it make them feel worse sometimes? Yes. Does it make them feel like they're not normal? Yes. I mean, as my work as a therapist, I've never met this normal person. Is there a normal person somewhere who doesn't experience grief, who's never experienced pain, who's never had a bullying, who's never had someone say something nasty? Every single person on this planet has some kind of experience that hasn't been great. And if they somehow miraculously get to 30, get to 40 and have never had anything bad happen, the bad comes from not being relatable to others. How can you relate to someone who hasn't got the depth that comes from experiencing adversity and pain. It's almost like they're too perfect, and society tends to label people who are too perfect as fake or inauthentic, or it's hard to connect, right? It's hard to connect with someone who doesn't get what you've gone through. If someone's never gone through anything, their pain is going to be that they can't connect with people who've gone through things. So then that ends up being the thing that they go through. So anyway, those 3 topics, the school system, neurodivergence, and the DSM, let me know your thoughts on that. Let me know if it sparked something in you, or if it's a topic you'd like to discuss a little bit further, because I think it's really interesting. And I hate social media for a lot of reasons, but I also love the fact that we are all talking more openly about these discussions because of the honesty that's showing up on social media these days. People aren't scared of getting cancelled or scared of saying what they want to say, because they're just like, fuck it, I'm just going to say it, and we need to talk about this because it benefits us all if we have open and honest discussions. All right, beautiful souls, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope that this sparks something in you, and I hope that you're proud of yourself for showing up here again today, feeding your mind, feeding your soul. I love you. I care about you. And I'm going to see you in the next episode of the 4Q podcast. Bye for now.